the thing that keeps me going is like continuing to learn how to express the music that's kind of already swirling in our heads or already happening. And then doing that with people is a whole different and beautiful thing.
Welcome to the Acoustic Guitar Podcast. I'm executive producer Stephanie Campos, and I'm pleased to be sharing this episode with you. Nick Grizzle and Jeffrey Pepper Rogers recently sat down with guitarist, singer, and writer Courtney Hartman. They discuss Hartman's evolution from flashy flatpicker to introspective songwriter, insights from teaching music, her relationship with Bourgeois Guitars, the staying power of old-time music, and so much more. If you enjoy this episode, please consider joining the Acoustic Guitar Patreon community, where your contribution of $1 per month or more supports creating resources for guitarists like this show. You'll also get some extra special perks in return. Learn more at patreon.com/acousticguitarplus.
What's been inspiring your playing lately?
That's a really good question. A couple things come to mind. We've been listening to like old time music around the house and playing for my daughter. There's a different like what can I do to make her smile? That kind of lightness. But learning from clawhammer banjo players and fiddle players is always something I've liked to do, but have had more time at home to do a little more of that. And then in the songwriting realm, writing just about this season of life and co-writing with people who are in or have been in similar seasons.
Now, when you talk about clawhammer banjo and fiddle and old-time music and things, are you talking about taking ideas from that over to guitar? Or because I know you play these other instruments as well. Are you doing both?
Yeah, I have not been playing those other instruments as much, but more taking them to guitar. Transcribing very loosely because it's been years since I've either transcribed by writing down or, exactly. But yeah, learning them on guitar, I feel like it pulls me out of some like guitar-y habits and just opens up new spaces for me.
So is all this for you feeding into songwriting or doing instrumental work as well?
Yes, and I think it all feeds. It's kind of like it's always everything is feeding everything in some way. I do find that when I'm in a songwriting zone, like songwriting for me is not exercising my guitar muscle or like exercising that part of my brain or that part of like what I love to do. And at a certain point, maybe it will, like after the song is written, maybe then there's like more integrated guitar stuff that feels challenging and beautiful and exciting. Otherwise, it does feel like it's two separate parts of me. And so sometimes when I'm in a songwriting zone, the guitar part of me might lapse a little bit in that space or vice versa. If I'm focused on working on guitar things, then I might not be writing as much. And part of that is just the nature of having limited time, more and more so as like a child is in our life, and that takes a lot of time.
Your songwriting, your songs on your albums, not bluegrassy stuff, in the traditional pickin' kind of sense, right? Like, it's very different.
I mean, I haven't like played bluegrass in a long time as far as, playing it out. It's definitely what I grew up on, and I still love it, and it's a joyful thing. But as far as my own writing, I guess I write what comes to me, and that's influenced by everything I hear. I think we're all just kind of this amalgamation of what we've absorbed.
You said not really playing bluegrass out so much at this point, But I'm wondering, what are some of the things that you feel like the grounding in bluegrass and fiddle tunes and that music carry over into the music that you are playing now?
Playing tunes and learning tunes and these melodies that are like simple and yet intricate, like the way they move through different shapes of a very few number of notes, and there's like a rhythm in the melody and the way that phrases repeat, and then there are like slight shifts that like make the tune what it is. And there's this huge volume of material that really is like, when it boils down to it, it's like a very simple amount of like modes or chord structures or even like melody structures, and yet there's like endless variation. And so that to me feels like it's been hugely informative in how I think about melody and how I write melody for songs. And then just the timelessness of the songs that come from that repertoire. Again, like simple, and yet you dig in and you're like, oh my goodness. And the intricacies are once you like go a few levels deeper. So that to me has completely formed who I am as a songwriter then. The way that like crooked fiddle tunes, which are just like tunes that don't have square phrases, so they might have an extra phrase of 5 or an extra phrase of 6 bars or something, and it's just called crooked is how you would call that. To me, that also has informed like the just allowing the either the lyrics or the melody to just like take precedence over keeping things square and keeping things like normal. And I think that is so, I love that. That's the kind of stuff that I get excited about.
Listening to some of your recent records and have such beautiful kind of soft atmospheres to them and to those songs. And one of the things that I was realizing is that, in terms of guitar, like there's a lot of very lush guitar going on in your songs, but there's very little of a conventional guitar solo kind of thing going on in there. I'm just wondering, is that sort of a conscious choice to steer in that direction, or is that just sort of what the material seems to want?
I think a little bit of both. Something that I got a little burnt out on, playing in the bluegrass context and needing to always like project, as it was always a matter of like just like, am I being heard? Because guitar is hard to capture in that way, especially in a band context. And so there was that question, and just always needing to like play basically as loud as you could, right? That's the thing as acoustic guitar players. But also for soloing, I had this question like why am I taking a solo here? Or is this, what is this doing to this song? What is this doing to the listener's imagination as they're listening to the lyrics? And am I actually doing anything to carry them somewhere? And so that informed how I thought about improvising over those songs. But it also maybe, there was a part of me that just was like, I'm tired of just soloing, right? And so I think when I went to create my own music, I wasn't intentionally not doing that. It was just that there wasn't always, it didn't always feel like it was necessary, and I didn't want to do it unless it was necessary. And yeah, as I'm creating now, like I miss that like visceral feeling of just like opening up musically and being able to carry a whole band with, you're kind of like the horse at the front of the carriage when you're singing or when you're playing a solo, and that feeling is amazing. And so there's a I can sense that in me as like, oh yeah, a part of me does love that and loves the freedom and just opening that comes in doing that kind of improvisation.
But you don't want to feel like, okay, verse, chorus. Now I got to do a solo because that's what happens next.
Yeah, that doesn't do anything for me if it doesn't serve the song. And so in the context of like playing acoustic guitar, soloing rhythm, and just feeling like your only real battle was like whether you were heard or not. That was, me in my mid-20s, like that was the question, early 20s. Then when I got into the recording context, what I wanted was like, I wanted to know and be able to capture the sound of like my thumb, the skin on my thumb against the string, like the intimacy of sound. I wanted that, and then I also wanted to just like be big and wide and lush with sound, in that context, which you can't necessarily do with a guitar either, and you can't have sustain. So I think I was wanting both, and that was where both of those sounds were coming from, was just wanting to explore that in a way I hadn't been able to.
In terms of creating those kind of textures and songs, I was wondering, and I'm actually not sure about this, whether tunings at all are part of that landscape for you in songwriting?
Somewhat. I don't think I lean on it as much as I could, or as much as some folks do. I tend to find a tuning that I'm excited about, and then I write a bunch in that tuning. And so I've done a little bit less of just like going to a more random place. Although there's a song off of Glade, Bright at My Back, and I recorded a number of different guitar parts. And so then after the recording was done and I needed to figure out how to play it, I ended up with this really weird, when you just strum it, it's very out and dissonant. But I wanted to be able to hit the bass notes on the low strings and also play the high part. So it worked backwards in that case of, the song happening. And then after the recording was done, figuring out a wacky tuning was what was necessary in order to recreate the recording of it. But yeah, it is a really beautiful way of opening up new things, I think.
You're also a teacher. You taught at the Blue Ridge Guitar Camp recently, I saw, and a lot of other places, I'm sure. How has teaching been fulfilling for you as a guitarist?
What I have found is that, let's see, I like teaching and it's inspiring. I don't always love, like, it can get a little bit old to just teach like right hand technique, or to just teach like, here's how to play this tune, and you do that over and over again, or you do that at camps, and that to me feels like it becomes draining. When I can teach with the context of this group of people or this person, they're coming here and being totally vulnerable in trying something that is new to them, or is maybe difficult to them, or in sharing a song that opens up a part of them. I think a shift for me happened when I saw people doing that, and I got to just be there and helped guide them through that place of vulnerability, or helped guide them into a place of like feeling brave, or into a place of connecting with a stranger when you're improvising together, and then all of a sudden I watch them walk away and they're friends, and then hopefully they walk back into their life, getting home, and they're able to be more courageous in their job, or they're able to be more open with a partner. Like, to me, when teaching stopped at just, we're going to play guitar, I had a hard time connecting with it and being present as a teacher. When I felt like, oh no, this is a door, which, because students might go, they leave, they come back, and they're basically the same level. They're not, most of them aren't really progressing in a way that can like make you feel satisfied as a teacher. But we don't see the progression that might happen in their lives as a whole. And so if I can be a part of impacting their lives as a whole, whether that's in a lesson or a workshop or a camp.
What are some things that you feel like you have learned for yourself about guitar or about songwriting by being in that position of trying to help other people do it? Have you taken lessons away that you've helped you understand things about what you do yourself?
This year, I feel like every season I end up teaching a little bit differently because I'm learning different things. Recently, like talking about the power of listening and how often we play our instruments and there's that initial like childlike curiosity about sound, right? Which we all can point back to where we were just like, this sound is amazing. Like I'm making this motion and this sound is coming out. And we're just totally captivated by this sound. And then we get a little bit more into like the obsession over how to make the sound. And I think sometimes we forget to actually listen to what's coming out of our instruments. I know that I do. And so really that's just a matter of like being present. And so we get caught up with like, how what are my hands doing? Am I moving into this position? I'm not going fast enough. I wonder what they're thinking. All of those adult kind of things that we get caught up with, and we're no longer just like listening and being present with like what the sound is today in this moment. So that's something that's like, that's a life of learning for me. Otherwise it's, I think I learn a lot about my own body through teaching, as I'm slunched over right now, teaching about body awareness, and especially anybody, like I've had difficulty with my hands in the past, and kind of currently have to be extra mindful, but watching these people who are, older and in a different season of life where, they have an extra need to be aware of their body in order to continue playing guitar. That kind of helps me reprioritize that for myself.
Reminds me of you gave an interview to Acoustic Guitar Magazine in 2017, and you were talking about the shape of notes. And this, what you're talking about here, with being mindful and really listening to the sounds coming out of your instrument, makes me think of that. And I wanted to see if you could expand on that idea where you were talking about the shape of notes. So the full quote was, I didn't want to play guitar like a guitar player. Russ Barenberg was one of the earliest guys where I remember very specifically being like, I want to sound the way he sounds. It wasn't all about just the notes. It was about the shape of the notes. Okay.
Interesting, Courtney. If I time machine myself back there, in my mind, I like the notes as like, rather than this kind of like 2D flat thing that just like kind of pummels forward, there being like a roundness to the notes, but also like, the shape of the notes, like how it's different as a fiddle player that can have this swelling note that sustains some. What does that look like if we try to create that note on guitar? To play a note that comes out of a trumpet, how would that feel if we played that on guitar? Or a piano? Like, I think I probably listen more to piano than to any other instrument, as far as just like in life and around the house. How does that look? And how does, the shape of notes in that way? It could be the shape of the sound wave, like if you're watching Pro Tools or something, because that's fascinating too. And like, the big kind of full belliedness of a big bass note, or, but I think more than anything was just probably referring to emulating other instruments in that way.
Plus the thing that makes me think of is, Russ Barenberg is such a singing kind of guitar player, much more vocal oriented player in a way, than as opposed to the, the barreling, fast notes kind of thing. And that's something that I hear in a lot of your playing as well. In addition to maybe other instruments, more of a vocal quality.
Yeah, that's great. That's what I want. Something I often teach is getting people to sing what they hear in their head, and then we practice translating that to guitar as fluidly as possible, kind of in small steps. And when I'm playing my best, I think it's when that's happening unconsciously and fluidly. And I'm not relying on the guitar-y things that I've learned over the years, but really just like playing what's in my head and what's responding to the people around me.
Yeah, I see this a lot in jazz where a player will be singing along with their playing. Do you ever do that?
I do that as a practice, not in public. Yeah, and even just as a warm-up to do that. Practicing being led by your voice rather than leading with your instrument. If you can get really quiet and practice hearing what's in your head, right? Often if we pick up the guitar, we go to play the same things. Somehow I'm always playing in the key of E, or just something, just playing with open strings in that way. If I practice just getting quiet in more of a meditative way, hearing what's in my head and then going to play, I think that's just exercising that muscle of constantly not surrendering. Maybe it's uniting with what's already in your body and what's in your mind, rather than always defaulting to what our hands are used to doing.
So you were a guest artist in one of my songwriting workshops, and one of the things that you talked about then was carving out regular blocks of time just to write whatever comes to you during that time. I'm wondering what to you is the value of structuring things like that, as opposed to just writing when something strikes you and inspiration strikes you.
In the season I'm in now, which is full of parenting a little munchkin, if I didn't carve out space, it wouldn't happen, I don't think. Well, I think carving out space also just reminds me that this is a part of who I am and what I love. And then maybe inspiration will come that afternoon, right? In an ideal world, I would have space in the morning to do some writing. And then that muscle is kind of it's warmed up. And so then if something comes later in the day or in a conversation, I'm more prone to recognize it and either jot it down or capture it for later, or just file it away, and tomorrow we'll get there. Tomorrow we'll return to that place. I go through, I don't write every day all the time. I go through seasons where that's important to write every day, and so there's that, and then something else takes prominence for a little while, whether that's playing every morning or something else. But yeah, there's something to me about the consistency that just opens you up, or opens me up to say yes to whatever is there.
Would you say the same thing is valuable for just playing? I mean, that to sort of carve out structure time, okay, this is my guitar time right now.
That sounds awesome. That sounds so great. For the last month and a half, I would go out to the garden every morning before Temple, my daughter, was awake, usually, or sometimes, if my husband was watching her for a minute, and even 10 minutes of just standing and playing and being in the presence of the sounds of trees and birds and the morning. It's so great. That feels like it enlivens my day. And then I've touched my guitar that day. This might always exist for me, but it's if I go through days where I haven't played, something's off, my hands feel weird, and I'm happier if I just get to play a little bit every day. but it's not like an hour or 2 hours or 4. It's like maybe I can play for 10 minutes and that feels like a win. And then if I get more than that, that's also great. But right now, that's where it's at.
I know for me personally, with parenthood came this whole new understanding of experience of just kind of joyful outbreaks of music in the house,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
beyond just like, okay, I'm going to try to write a song or I'm going to try to play right now, but just sort of like the way kids just have music flying out of them all the time. Are you experiencing that in your home?
Yes. And Temple has just started like dancing. She loves to like dance and groove. I don't know where these dance moves come from, but she's got like a little clogging move that she gets excited about. And so that makes you want to like sing a song or play the banjo or whatever it is. And I hope that just continues to become more of like, I don't know, I think we're sillier and that's awesome. But also just making music happen and turning it on because you can literally see it change a mood. And sometimes that's so necessary.
What is something that maybe comes up pretty regularly with your students? Are there things that they come to you with, or questions, or maybe things that you see in general that you find yourself wanting to point out to them or suggest to students just time and time again?
Well, some people were working on songwriting, so that's specific. Some people were working on songwriting and guitar playing, or singing and guitar playing. I think as far as guitar playing goes, often we end up talking about, one, good use of our bodies, using our weight and not our muscles, using rather the weight of our muscles so that we're not bringing in extra tension. That's really important for me that's an important thing that I want to instill in people and help walk them through. And the other thing I think is really just helping people to acknowledge and begin to express the music that's inside of them. Like, that sounds so simple and even corny, but that's what it's about, I think, in the end. If people can feel like they have the tools to do that in a way where they're not just reading a tablature solo and trying over, for a year to like precisely play that one thing. To me, that doesn't feel as inspiring. It might be to some people, so that's great. But the thing that keeps me going is like continuing to learn how to express the music that's kind of already swirling in our heads or already happening. And then doing that with people is a whole different and beautiful thing.
Well, how about for yourself? What's the best piece of guitar advice you've ever received?
There's a couple. I have this swirl of things that come to mind. Early on, a guitarist named Uwe Kruger helped me unanchor my wrist, and that totally changed my playing. Just help, if I'm showing you in the video, but if I just describe it, if your wrist is anchored on the bridge, you can see in your forearm all the muscles engage. And so lifting that to where your hand was in this more of a resting position, like if you were swinging your arms by your side, there's all these beautiful angles that happen then. A straight angle from your shoulder down to your elbow, a nice straight line from your elbow to your wrist. And so unkinking my wrist in that way was a big thing as like a 12 or 13-year-old. So that was a big piece. I think in my mind, early on, also like watching guitarists play. There's in my mind that Brian Sutton just playing at Rocky Grass, which was a big festival that I loved a lot, or influential festival on me. The whole body nature of playing and being in rhythm. And Julian Lodge, similar thing, like it's not just our arms, but our whole bodies. And so what are your feet doing? How are your ribs opening? And that kind of attentiveness and also like engagement. And it just like, it feels better when you're allowing your body and your core to move and groove. And be a part of it. And I think it's also, you produce a better sound and potentially can engage in a different way with an audience. I got to record with Bill Frisell for the album I did called Ready Reckoner. And I think sitting across from him and watching him, just the care with which he gave to every single note. Like, there was no rushing through anything, obviously, because it's Bill Frisell. But just so much care and presence with every note. And it made me feel held. And I think it definitely influenced me. As I continue to grow and learn and life changes and shifts happen, I'm excited to continue to learn and to grow and create in whatever season it is, and that it'll look different. It might not always be in the form of albums. It might not always be in the form of playing shows for seasons, but it's still something I care about a lot.
So, changing gears a bit, I wanted to ask you about your actual instruments, your guitars. I see you're a big fan of the Bourgeois and the smart archtop that you have. Drew you to those originally, and what keeps you coming back to those? Because you seem very passionate about those. I know people who play guitar tend to love their instruments, right? There's a reason that they have them, but I feel like you're even more passionate about these particular ones for some reason.
That's great. Let's see. So with Dana Bourgeois, I used to, like, my dad so graciously would take me to NAMM, which is like the big convention in California. I don't know, he had a friend who was able to get tickets, and I loved it. You know, it's like, it is overstimulation central, but I just loved getting to go play all the instruments. And that and IBMA, like the convention area, I just like loved getting to go play. So Dana would have a booth at both of those and was so kind. And I didn't have like I had a Taylor. Those are real guitars. It was one with a lot of inlay, which I was always like a little embarrassed about. My dad liked buying instruments on eBay. But I knew Brian Sutton played a Bourgeois for a while, and mostly I just liked the instruments. And Collings, you know, I liked going to all the booths. That's what I liked doing. And then Dana helped me out when I was in need of an instrument. My guitar got crushed, and he just loaned me one. And since that time, we've had more of a kind of a working relationship where I've played things that he was working on and wanted to try out, and he's built things for me that, like, I had a pilgrimage guitar that he built. That's one of my favorite instruments. Tiny little, he calls it the piccolo, and I just said I was gonna walk the Camino, and that was 500 miles, and I wanted to take a guitar, so he built the most lightweight thing and durable thing he could, and it's so special. And I've written so much music on it and recorded so much with it. It's just like, it's a totally special instrument to me. Anyhow, so that's Bourgeois. And then Lawrence Smart, he built the archtop that I play, which I love. And he's a really kind, wonderful person in Idaho. I guess, you know, I really value the artistry of these builders, and the fact that, like, it's a living relationship. Like, there's something so magical about old instruments, and if I have the money someday, maybe I'll have an old instrument that I love, but that's just like not been my zone. But I have had these really great relationships with current builders, and I think that's just something I value a lot. So yeah, played Lawrence's. We were at a camp together in Wyoming, and then I didn't ever give it back to him. So I think I want to buy this and have this as my own. And then more recently, the folks over at Pre-War, Matt and Wes, I have a guitar modeled after a J45 that they built and I got that from them about a year ago. Totally love it. It's been so fun to play. And again, like, just getting to know them, and they're just like two of the kindest people ever. And they are so passionate and so good at what they do. It's, yeah, that's a real gift.
What would be your like dream vintage guitar?
Oh, I mean, I think like an old like Martin Dreadnought, partly because it's just ingrained in me that's the guitar, right? And not all of them are really special, but the ones that are, there's nothing like it.
So the archtop, though, is not your typical bluegrass guitar. So what does the archtop specifically do for you, or why are you drawn to that?
I think initially I liked it because it wasn't a bluegrass guitar. It felt good to sing with, and most of the time now I play it through an amp, which is great. I love that. It responds really well to being tuned down, and usually I'll have it down a half step or a whole step, and that for me provides like such a nice thing to sing over, especially if I'm playing solo, or a lot of times I'll play with just duo with a drummer, and so I can fill up some of that bottom space with that guitar in a way that I can't with an acoustic or a dreadnought. I have it handy. I don't have it plugged in, but I can certainly play a second. Put that down a little bit. It also has this nice, a bit of a more rounded high end that I like. And right now it's tuned down a half step. So that gives a sense of like, it can be really honky, which I don't utilize all that often or always love, but there's a richness, I think.
Just to circle back, one other question that about guitars. The little guitar that you took traveling, is that a high-tuned guitar, or is it a standard pitch?
That one, I often keep tuned down a little bit as well. Sometimes a half step, or with this artist S. Carey that I play with him pretty often. There's a couple songs where it's nice to have that down a whole step, and it gets this real like kind of thummy, just like deep, rich, kind of as if you were playing a left-hand muted piano line of like that kind of sound. Yeah, so that's possible. And then that guitar went out on tour with Nickel Creek for a minute in an emergency situation, where they needed an instrument, and Sarah had it, I think, with like Nashville tuning. So that was a high, strung up high. So yes, both, I guess.
It must be pretty lightweight if you can bring it on a 500-mile walk then.
It was lightweight until I put a pickup in it, and then but it still is very lightweight. They did an incredible job. I'm so grateful for that instrument.
Is that something they make like usually, or was that something you said, here's what's in my head, can you make this?
Yeah, exactly. And I called Dana just being like, okay, here's a stupid idea. I think I'm going to do this walk and I want to take a guitar. I asked him thinking he might recommend like, the Taylor little tiny one, which I can't remember what that's called. Pretty great instrument for the size and price point. But he was just like, well, could I build you something? And so of course, yeah, duh. And then that what I didn't necessarily expect was how much I've used it in the studio, just because of how unique its sound is.
Have you been recording in the studio any new materials lately?
Yeah, I have. Just finished 2 weeks of tracking for a new record.
Oh.
So what kind of direction are your latest music going in?
I don't even totally know the answer to that. I think there's an acoustic element to this album, I think, that just came from me like missing that a bit. And this one, whereas Glade was about, I recorded most of that alone, had some friends send parts in, but a lot of it was just alone at the computer for months. And I missed playing music with people so much. And so that was important for me for this one, was to be in relationship with people musically and also just like energy wise. So that's a big part of it.
Are you talking about a rhythm section, drums, bass, whatnot, or what?
Yep. And there'll be some other more acoustic elements, but really just like, like all of these people are really good at what they do, and we get in a room together, and that's a moment that we rarely get to have. Getting to record with people is like such a special thing and such a privilege. And then recording with an engineer who's really good at what they do, it's just like, well, that's an amazing experience that sometimes I take for granted.
The Acoustic Guitar Podcast is produced by the team at Acoustic Guitar Magazine. This show is directed and edited by Joey Lusterman. Tanya Gonzalez is our producer. Executive producers are Lyzy Lusterman and me, Stephanie Campos. Our theme music was composed by Adam Perlmutter and performed for this episode by Jeffrey Pepper Rogers. If you'd like to support the podcast, we are on Patreon at patreon.com/acousticguitarplus. As a supporter, you'll have access to bonus episodes, guitar lessons, song transcriptions, and more. And if you're already a patron, thank you so much for your support.